Hello health lovers, it's your student Nurse V, and today on Health episode we are going to be talking about the nervous system. The nervous system is a very interesting and broad topic, and we are going to try to simplify it in this video, so do well to pay attention. Now, what is the nervous system? Remember that when we talk about system has to do with network of organs. When organs comes together, remember the organization of life, from cells to tissues, from tissues to organs, and organs makes up the system. Now, the nervous system are groups of organs and highly specialized cells that helps to control and coordinate the activities of other organs in the body. So the nervous system are groups of organs or highly specialized cells that helps to control all the body activities. Now we want to talk about the development of the nervous system. The development of the nervous system is called neurulation, and it takes place during the embryonic stage of embryogenesis. So if you remember your embryogenesis, we have the pre-embryonic stage, the embryonic stage, and the fetal development. So this neurulation takes place in the embryonic stage. Now it takes place in 8 different steps. So there are 8 steps of neurulation. Now the first thing is going to be the formation of the neural plate. Now from the formation of the neural plate, we have the formation of the neural tube. Then from there we have the formation of the neural crystals. Now once the neural crystals are formed, we have the differentiation of the brain. Then from there we have the development of the spinal cord, we have the myelination, and we have the functional maturation. Now let's talk about the formation of the neural plate. Now at the 3rd week of embryonic stage, this occurs in the 3rd week, and during embryonic stage, the ectoderm, remember we have 3 germ layers: the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. Now the ectoderm, that is the outer layer, begins to thicken, and it begins to thicken and becomes hard. So note that once the ectoderm becomes very thickened and hardened, it turns into a neural plate, and the neural plate is the first significant sign of neurulation. It's a sign that neurulation has occurred because it begins from the neural plate. Now in this neural plate we have several cells, and these cells then evolve to become the nervous tissues. Now going to the 2nd stage of neurulation, we have the formation of the neural tube. Now the neural plate begins to fold inward, and when it folds inward, it forms a groove called a neural groove. Now it folds inward to form a U shape, and once it forms this U shape, that U shape is called a groove. Now in that U shape we have 2 raised edges. Now we have one edge by the right, one edge by the left. Now these 2 raised edges are called the neural folds. This neural fold then begins to fuse, come together, and join each other, and once they join each other, they form a little hollow, a little hole, a little tube in between. Now that hollow is called the neural tube. Now this neural tube formation ends in the 4th week of pregnancy. The anterior part of the neural tube, that is where the brain develops from, and the posterior part of the neural tube is where the spinal cord develops from. Now let's talk about the 3rd stage of neurulation, which is formation of the neural crystals. Now this neural crystals forms as the neural tube is forming, and once the neural tube forms, the neural crystals will detach. Remember we had some cells that was already there, so these neural crystals will detach, and once they detach, they migrate to different parts of the body and also form most components of the peripheral nervous system. We are going to that. We have 2 different divisions of the nervous system: the central and the peripheral. So they form the most components of the peripheral nervous system. Now let's go to the 4th stage of neurulation, which is differentiation of the brain. Now remember that the neural tube has the anterior and the posterior part. The anterior part forms the brain, and the posterior part forms the spinal cord. Now differentiation of the brain takes place in the anterior part of the neural tube. Now the brain divides into 3 main vessels. Now we have the forebrain, which is otherwise known as the prosencephalon. We have the midbrain, which is otherwise known as the mesencephalon, and we have the hindbrain, which is otherwise known as the rubencephalon. Now this forebrain differentiates into 2 parts. Now we have the telencephalon and we have the diencephalon. Now in the telencephalon, that is where the cerebrum is the greatest part of the brain. So that is where the cerebrum develops from. Then we have the diencephalon. The diencephalon is where the thalamus and the hypothalamus forms from. So if you know what is thalamus lies above the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus lies below, and it controls the endocrine functions and the rest. So we talk about the hindbrain. So the hindbrain forms the brainstem. So this brainstem is composed of the cerebellum, the pons, the medulla oblongata, down to the spinal cord. So the hindbrain is divided into 2 parts. We have the metencephalon and we have the myelencephalon. Now the metencephalon forms the pons and the cerebellum, while the myelencephalon forms the medulla oblongata. So take note of all the cephalon. For the forebrain, the forebrain is called the prosencephalon. The midbrain is called a mesencephalon. The hindbrain is called a rhobencephalon. The prosencephalon, which is the forebrain, is differentiated into two parts, the telencephalon and the diencephalon. Now, the hindbrain is divided into two parts also. That is the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. So take note of the part of the brain and what forms from those parts. So over to the next stage of neurulation, we have the development of the spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord develops from the posterior part of the neural tube, and the neural tube becomes thickened, and once it becomes thickened, it forms two regions. Now we have the dorsal horn and we have the ventral horn. Now the dorsal horn carries the sensory impulses, while the ventral horn carries the motor nerves, that's the impulses. Now in this neural tube, that's the part where the spinal cord is being formed, the inner region is composed of the gray matter, which carries the cell bodies, while the outer region is composed of the white matter, which carries the nerve tissues. Now the spinal nerves begins to grow and connect to different parts of the body, so it sends information and receives information and takes the information to the brain. Now we now talk about the next stage of neurulation, which is development of the neurons and supporting cells. Now in this stage, two types of cells are being formed. We have the neurons and we have the neuroglia. Now the neurons are specialized cells that carries these nerve impulses, and they have two parts. It has the axon and it has the dendrite. Now we now talk about the neuroglia. Now the neuroglia is just a supporting cell. What it does is that it supports the neuron, it provides nutrients and also maintain homeostasis, maintain the internal environment. So the next stage of neurulation is myelination. Now at this stage, the nerve fibers are now formed, and now they are now covered with what we call myelin. Now this myelin helps the nerve impulses to travel very fast. Now what is this myelin and where is it originating from? Now the myelin originates from the Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system and the oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system. Now that takes us to the last stage of neurulation, which is the functional maturation. Now after the structural development, the brain begins, the nervous system begins to mature, reflexes begins to appear, the sensory and the motor pathways begins to appear, then the brain begins to function, and this takes us to the end of neurulation. Now development of the nervous system is called what? Neurulation, and remember it has 8 stages: the neural plate, the neural tube, the neural crystals, the differentiation of the brain, spinal cord development of neurons and supporting cells, the myelination, and functional maturation. So thank you for watching to this part. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about the divisions of the nervous system. Then we'll talk about the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Do well to like, share, and follow. Bye.